Welcome to our view from 3102. This is Tyson.
This is Don. Richie boy.
This is Sai.
Yankum. And this is Joe.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about AI. So let's get a little groundwork here. Who can give me a definition of AI, or what do we define as AI?
So artificial intelligence. So basically,
Nice. You knew the acronym. Good job.
Yeah.
That is the
Step
definition.
one.
I think we're done with the podcast. We defined it. I think we're good.
So I think when I think of AI, I think of like what that means for the future and how jobs are going to change and how the industry is going to change as a result of these advancements. I think we do need to make a distinction between the different types of AI that are possible and whether they are feasible in the near future or not.
Okay.
I don't know. Like I know that some companies have like automated robots to do certain things and stuff, and so we should establish what we mean by artificial intelligence and to what extent we want to talk about it. Like in terms of its.
Yeah. Like I think it's easy to think of AI as just some sort of extension of the Industrial Revolution, right? Like we have all these machines that do things, but I think AI is different than, it's obviously different than a tractor, but it's also different than a factory in which a bunch of robotic arms are making the parts, because those arms that move and take the bolt and screw it in and then take the wheel and put it on, whatever the things do, they're it's just do this and then repeat. It's just a wild.
I think that's
while you have electricity, keep it going. Just keep putting the stuff on. But yeah, like artificial intelligence is something inherently different that can. I guess it could react to new stimuli that it's never seen before and respond in a novel way. I think that might be a good way to describe AI. And so that's something that we've never really seen before in the economy in terms of things like self-driving cars or, I don't know. I think we all did some background research. So maybe we can... I don't know, do we want to start there? Do we want to talk about maybe some advancements in AI that we've seen and maybe that can help get a definition by example?
Well, I just wanted to kind of build off kind of like the more base level of what y'all were saying and a differentiation between what we have in our technology right now and what AI actually is, because there might not always be a clear distinction for any, random person that doesn't know much about AI.
Yeah.
So when you have a computer, things like that, someone might ask, or like Siri, someone might ask, isn't that AI? And there's some fundamental differences between something like Siri or a computer and then artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Although I feel like Siri's kind of a step in that direction.
It is a step.
But it's sort of programmed to be.
It is still
when you ask what's
Scripted.
the weather like, it just goes and does it. It doesn't have like some, novel conversation.
So it follows an algorithm, which is a key aspect of it. And an algorithm is basically just a recipe. If you go and you make chocolate chip cookies, there's a clear distinction of first you do this, second you do this, third you do this.
Yeah.
And so that's what...
But it would be like an AI would be like a chef robot who has an intuition of...
It's going to change up the recipe
chocolate,
for
so
this.
I'm going to add a little extra chocolate.
Right, exactly. Yeah. AI is going to change that recipe up for that particular situation. So it's dynamic in its responses.
Yeah. It's a good definition. I think one of the big things that happened recently with AI that I've heard a lot in the conversation is AlphaGo. Are you guys familiar with AlphaGo?
Oh yeah.
So for those who might not know, are you familiar, Joe, with AlphaGo? So there's a game. Is it a Chinese game, Rich?
Korean game.
It's a Korean game. So there's a Korean game. It's called Go, and it's basically you have a bunch of white stones and a bunch of black stones. And I believe your goal you can play as either one of the colors. It's like chess or something. It's played on a board. And your goal is to surround your enemy's pieces with your stones. I don't know all of the rules, but essentially chess is sort of a solved game in the sense that in the 90s, IBM came out with, what's that computer called? Deep Blue or something blue.
Something like that.
It's Deep Blue. And they came out with this computer that could beat Gary. I think it was Gary Kasparov that it beat, who was like the reigning master of chess in the world. That beat him at chess. But for a long time, people said, well, a computer can never figure out Go. There's so many different there's so many different board combinations of Go that the number of permutations of how the pieces could be ordered on the board exceed the number of atoms in the universe. Like, it's very complicated just in terms of it's X by X in terms of dimension, and there's so many different places where you could put your stones that like a computer could never process all of that. And so you can't just play Go based on a predefined set of rules. You have to play based on intuition, like, I think that this is the best way to go, but there'd be no way of knowing for sure. Which is why it's so impressive that a computer was able to do it, because the computer, it can deal with uncertainty in ways that no computer has been able to do before. So, DeepMind, which is a startup company from the UK, which was purchased by Google, they developed AlphaGo, and they basically trained it. I think this is how they trained it, is they essentially just said, here are the rules, here are the parameters, play against yourself. Like, start a game and just try a strategy, and then, like, split your mind into two and play against yourself, and then whichever strategy wins, remember that, and then use those strategies over and over again. And then you just have it run a million, probably more, hundreds of millions of simulations until you've refined yourself to where you've come up with your strategies. They didn't hard code anything. They didn't say, like, oh, if your opponent has done this, then you should do this. So, and then they played against some of the best Go players in the world and basically beat all of them. And then I think recently they've maybe this was a year ago, but they came out with something called Alpha Zero, and it was just like a step up, and it like played 100 games against AlphaGo and beat AlphaGo in like every single one of its games. So it's sort of like how AI can, not only can it be better than every human, but then when we build an AI that's better than every human, like that AI can be self-improving or could get better than even it was before. Mm-hmm. So this was a long way to explain that this is a potential way for AI to exist in our culture, is that we have some sort of problem economically. I think an example that they've talked about is they have, there's different eye diseases that are characterized by a particular look in someone's eye where you, like, you're able to examine the eye, and if it has spots here, here, and here, then it means you have, a glaucoma or something, and you need to get surgery or whatever. So doctors have trained their whole lives to do something like this, and then you can just train an AI by saying, here's a picture of someone that has the disease, and here's a picture of someone that doesn't. Then here's another picture of someone that has it and someone that doesn't. You feed it 10,000 images, it learns to recognize that pattern on its own, and then you show it a picture and you say, does this person have it or not? And then it's able to correctly identify whether the person doesn't have it.
But isn't that like a subset of artificial intelligence? Because I think
that's machine learning,
yeah. Machine learning.
Which is a subset, yeah, that's
so that's
right.
only one branch, though, of AI. Because, I was reading this, and it says they have machine learning, computer vision, autonomous vehicles, smart robotics, and virtual agents. So they have, like, these
so it'd be interesting to talk about all of those. So that's part of machine learning, is you feed it all this data, and it learns patterns that you didn't explicitly tell it to look for or to identify.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it's like a human, like, a baby doesn't know how to speak English or speak any language, and so it just recognizes these patterns of how you're speaking, and then it learns to speak it. Like, you can't sit down and tell a baby, like, okay, these are the grammatical rules of English. First, you have an article, and then you have a noun, and then you have a verb. Like, you can't do that. So it just learns from scratch.
But why is machine learning the one that's most invested upon?
I don't think it is
necessarily.
But I think it's a... What do you mean?
No, I was reading this, like right now, it's Priceonomics.com, and it says investment breakdown of AI by category, and machine learning is 62% invested.
I feel like that's, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe someone else knows better, but I think that machine learning is sort of the mathematical process whereby you do AI.
Yeah.
So it's like saying that most investment in computers goes into hardware, and if or whatever, like, or software. It's like, well, yeah, duh, like, that's a big category. I don't know. I feel like those.
What are the other categories?
She said computer vision.
Being
autonomous vehicles, smart robotics, virtual agents.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think so, like
machine learning. I think maybe it's because like we have a better grasp on like how to actually implement machine learning. That's why there are a lot of things on a lot of studies
versatility
on that, right? Because like I was reading this like article. I think it's related to what you said actually.
Yeah.
Like how like you train a machine like what would be the proper term? Like not a learning machine? No. Like it's
you train a machine.
A program like that you write.
Yes.
And I think this
you train a neural network.
A neural network.
That's
right.
probably the best way.
And so you give it data that you already know, what the answer is.
Yeah.
For if that makes sense, right? So and that way you're able to change like the weights and stuff in the neural network, and that's how it learns.
Yeah, we've been talking about this in
that.
computational biology, where if you have a data set of 100 points, then you feed the computer 80 of them, and you train it on those 80 points, and then you feed it the 20 that it hasn't seen, and then you see if it's able. So this would be an example of, like, to go back to the eye example.
Yeah.
You have 100 pictures where you know that you either know that the person has glaucoma or they do not have glaucoma. Then you feed it 80 of those pictures to train it, and then you feed it the next 20, and you say, tell me whether this person has glaucoma or not. And you already know the answer beforehand, but you're able to see if it knows. And so that's, like, how a lot of machine learning works. But I think in terms, like, back to those categories, like, I feel like that's an example. Like, the example I just showed was an example of computer vision, right? I mean, it's like a computer looking at something or being able to analyze an image and then, like, tell you something about it. Then autonomous vehicles, that's Google's self-driving car. I think Uber's developing one. I think, is it true that Apple's developing one? They said Apple was developing one for a long time, and there were rumors online. I don't know if that ended up being true.
That's the first time I'm hearing about that.
But, I mean, I think it would be the same. Is you give it a bunch of input data. You have a bunch of cameras and sensors around, and you give it all this data, and then it learns how to drive. Like, you feed it a bunch of, like, here's how a regular person drives. Like, here's a bunch of data on a real person who hasn't gotten in an accident or whatever. And then you say, okay, learn from that, and then go out in the world and drive and figure out.
And that's what people are doing, is they're feeding Google that visual stimuli through that "Are you a robot?" test.
Oh,
clicking on the images.
You're right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen that? Rich, have you seen that? Have you seen, like, when you go on a website and it'll say, we need to know if you're a robot or not. Please, please, it'll show you a grid.
That's a captcha, yeah.
Yeah, it'll show you a caption. It'll show you a grid, and it'll say, tell us which parts of the grid have a street sign in it, or tell us which part of the grid has a storefront in it. They do that because you're providing information to the AI so it can learn how to drive.
Whoa.
That's pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah. I totally forgot about that until Tank brought it up, but I watched a video about that's why they do it. It's pretty cool.
They have ulterior motives, dang.
And then is what they do
Doing
is
the grunt work.
they'll give you two a lot of times. They'll give you one where they already know the answer, and then they'll give you one that they don't know the answer to. I think that's how they do it. And then, like, the first one, when you solve the first one, then they're like, okay, this person is actually not a robot, so now we can give them a real thing, and then they'll just provide us with extra data so that we can figure out how to get our self-driving cars to work. So but that combines computer vision too, because it's like computers are bad at knowing, like, is this pixel, this polygon, is this a sign, or is it a person, or is it a whatever? So, pretty cool. Okay, so do we have anything else, any other thoughts about how to define AI, or maybe how to distinguish it from other, whether it's just a basic machine, or, I mean, when we're talking about AI, we're also not talking just about robots, right? Like, I feel like that's, when you think AI, you might think of some Terminator robot, some Hollywood stuff, but an AI could just as easily be a computer program as it could be, and it also could be a robot. I mean, we have, Boston Dynamics?
Right.
Have we all seen those videos of it dances to the Bruno Mars song, or it does gymnastics and it does flips? Right, But from what I've heard, that isn't AI, because you just hard code, here's how to move. But the idea would be, if you have a robot that can move like that, and then you give it some sort of general intelligence or artificial intelligence, then it would know how to, like, interact with you and be your personal assistant, or be like your little guard dog or whatever.
Well, the thing that is cool about Boston Dynamics is that it is the robots themselves, the programming that goes into them, they are responsive to their environment. So you place an obstacle in front of them.
Yeah, I've seen that.
What makes them not quite AI is the fact that you're still telling them the desired destination. There's just getting to that destination based on the environment. An AI would be able to, I mean, obviously you'd still tell an AI desired outcomes, but an AI would be able to go to destinations that it viewed desirable on its own.
Yeah.
It wouldn't need to be...
Or at least it could make sort of subsets of its goals. Like, you say your goal is to do this, and then it's able to derive from that lots of other things that it should do in order to get to that goal.
Right.
Yeah, which I don't like that. I don't like how everybody, when it comes to AI, is fascinated about, like, humanizing it. Like, I feel like it should be more about enhancing human life rather than, like, emulating it.
Well, what do you mean? Like, I mean, I think most people are excited about it because it could eliminate a lot of the drudgery that we do. Like, jobs that are pretty easy, but not like not just totally robotic. Like, I mean, I think the classic one, not to disparage anyone that works at McDonald's, but would be like a McDonald's type job.
Yeah.
Like a job where basically all you do is you take people's orders all day, you go in the back, you get some burgers, and at night you clean up, and like that's it. It doesn't require some sort of higher level thinking. So I think one of the major advantages to having some sort of artificial intelligence would be you develop some sort of Boston Dynamics type robot that does the cleaning, that does the food making, that does all of those other things, and then that frees up a lot of the population to do something potentially more productive.
But I think, but you meant it more along the lines of like, we're kind of curious about making
it human.
Like a Terminator, like
Yeah.
a robot.
Yeah.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Like one thing I think about, like, if we do humanize it a little like more,
sex
Like-
robots.
Sex robots.
Yeah, no.
Let's go.
no, if we do that, how like I feel like that would somehow like kind of change the meaning of life and stuff. If you guys get what I'm saying.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel, and that is like a profound question. Is if we get a robot, especially if we got like some really advanced robot that's actually in like flesh, like we have some sort of
Like
we
from
just create.
Westworld?
Yeah, like you just create like a brain, and then you implant it into like flesh, or you use stem cells to like grow a new human. Like at what, and then like if that robot or whatever you want to call it is like conscious and it has morals and it understands different
That'd be
implications
so
of things.
crazy.
But then what implications does that have for like people who think that there's such thing as like a soul or like a spirit that is like a defining characteristic of what it means to be human? Like, does that discredit the idea that there is a soul if we're able to make like a human ourselves that it behaves exactly like
Has
a regular
its own
person?
conscience.
Yeah, I don't know.
How will we know if it actually has its own conscience?
That's a good
there's
question.
no-
Let's get into it. Let's
It's
just
a
jump right
program
into
on
it.
a loop. Like I feel like
Wait, what?
it's a program going on a continuous loop. I don't think it's so much having a conscience. It's just
Well, I don't know.
reacting
Like
to all the stimuli that you've input into it already.
that's
But I
true.
mean,
but
going
how is that
back
different than a
to-
person? Isn't that what a person does? Is they
Yeah.
just react to all the stimulus?
We're
all the
trained, like
stimuli?
humans are a creature of habits.
Yeah,
so
but we still have the willpower to not react to
So
it. I
it'd just
guess.
be
That's true.
like agency, like being able to choose right or wrong, independent of your past situation.
Yeah, I mean, and also like an AI can't reproduce. It can't really.
Maybe
be
they can.
human. I mean, that's weird. Why would you make an AI like that?
Okay.
But
well, I
going
mean,
back-
an
theoretically,
AI
it's
could re-
possible.
Yeah, I mean that's so
Yeah.
there's a problem. Maybe this is a good point to jump into this. There's what is called in artificial intelligence the singularity, which means that we get to a point where we make a robot that's smarter than us, or maybe not necessarily smarter. It could be as smart as us, but basically, is what it can do is it's smart enough to make a robot that's smarter than itself. And once you have that, you have an infinite loop of robots that can make smarter and smarter robots.
But
Right.
for what purpose?
Well,
But
the
I
idea
feel
would be like we tell the robots, hey, our goal is we want to live in peace. We don't want war. We want abundant resources so everyone can have plenty of food. Everyone has a nice home to live in. We want quality entertainment. Like you give it the set of everything a human could find desirable, and you tell it maximize that. And then you tell the robot to go do that, and then it just goes. And the idea would be it just makes the world a better place. It cleans up our streets for us. It builds homes for us, and we're just left to.
Do nothing.
I don't
So
know.
what's
That is the
purpose
question.
of
Yeah,
that? Like,
yeah.
why lose purpose in life by creating AI to replace you? Like, I feel like that's our.
I think
Well,
that-
then why would you
being
want to be
here.
rich and like? I think everyone's goal is like I want to be rich and retired and like not.
I think
do
that's
anything.
an element of the human nature is the fact that we know certain types of consequences that come with progress, but the desire for progress is too great for our natural human
Yeah.
desires.
And I feel
And
like
AI is the next step in technological progress.
I think like one reason why AI is so enticing is because, say for example we are able to make an Android, right? That means we could probably AI is enticing because it can help us solve problems in different ways, especially like in engineering, especially in medicine. And so if we have that helping us as well, then we could
Yeah.
also
That's a good point.
further
Yeah.
our progress as well. But,
Yeah.
but also
like there's diseases we can't cure that an AI might be able to cure, and so it would be dumb not to make one because there's all these problems we haven't solved.
another thing might be space flight, right?
Yeah.
And droids, they don't age, and if we create something like that,
You send them off to Mars, they colonize it for us, and we get there. Nice fresh planet.
They did all the hard work.
Yeah. Thanks for
which,
terraforming
I'm
for us,
all
guys.
for that, but it's like, what about the burger flipper at McDonald's? Like, maybe he was
Get a new
Too
job.
Yeah,
they
so
can't get
here's
a new job if they're too dumb. Maybe they
so that's why we
only
need
afford having a high school career, and that was the end of their life.
so here's the idea. What if? Well, I have a question to pose to everyone. What percentage of people do you think are fulfilled by the job that they currently have?
Probably
Not very many.
No.
I think maybe 10% of people are fulfilled by their job, and 90% of people go to work because it's what they have to do to live.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I think you underestimate, like, some people just aren't as educated and they
No,
can't.
that's true. And so the idea is that you have these AI that do all the drudgery for us, that lifts up our economy to where we have all of these extra resources and extra money that don't belong to any one person in particular, because it's just this group of robots that's doing it. They don't need wages. So then you say, okay, well, what do we do with that money? We reinvest it into education, and if you were a former burger flipper, you get to go to college for free, and you get to learn a new skill, something that's more rewarding, or you get to learn how to be whatever your dream was when you were in kindergarten. You can go and you can be a...
who would subsidize that though? Like, would it be the government or would that be the company itself?
That's a good question. I don't know all the details with that. I think that there's been talks of whatever company comes out with this and is able to vastly increase our productivity as humans, that maybe that company or just companies in general get taxed a little bit more. Which, I mean, it's hard because obviously you say, well, this is America, like you should just be compensated for your work. But imagine that we make these robots that are just highly successful, that contribute $20 trillion a year to our economy or something ridiculous, literally double the size of our economy. Does it make sense for one business to have that $20 trillion and the one person at the top of that business, Jeff Bezos or the Elon Musk, to become a trillionaire? Like, I mean, I'm all for capitalism and like, oh, you can reap the rewards of whatever you do.
Right.
But, I mean, you don't, at some point, there's some amount of wealth inequality that should just not be, acceptable. If you have millions of people who lose their jobs as burger flippers or as truck drivers or whatever monotonous job they do, and they have $0, they have no productivity in society, and then you have one guy that has $20 trillion, like at what point do you say, hey, that's a little bit too much money, we need to spread it out a little bit so people can be happy? I don't know. It's a hard
It's a
problem.
little bit more of the political side of AI.
Yeah. Which it does have these political ramifications. I
Right.
think it's important we talk about it, but I don't know the solution.
And it's also, like, having to do with their free will. Like, maybe these people were okay with, like, dropping out of high school and just being a burger flipper for the rest of their life. Like, who says that
But
even if
what
you...
percent of people do you think are really do you think that most burger flippers would be happier as a burger flipper than having something else, or do you think
Then
they
being
just did it out of...
forced to go to school when that's what they chose to do? They
No,
chose
but I
to
feel like a
drop
lot
out?
of people do it because they're like, school's too expensive. Like, it's expensive.
School
Like,
is expensive. Like, we go to a really cheap school compared to like other places, like in Madison. Out-of-state tuition is $30,000 just for tuition.
Yeah,
Like,
but I'm talking
so-
about the people who don't even want to go to high school. Like, high school is free if it's a public school.
That's true. That's a really good point. So, what do those people want to, like, what would they do if they weren't working at McDonald's?
Drugs?
Smoke weed every day.
I think that's a little bit of a stereotype, maybe,
Yeah.
but
But I feel like it could be true. But is that just a phase? Is that just some wayward teen phase where some subset of the population goes through that, and then when they hit 25, they realize, oh shoot, I could have done more with my life, but then they have nothing else to do, so they're just stuck being a burger flipper? Like, how many people are there that really for their entire lives would prefer sitting at home playing video games, masturbating, and smoking weed over doing anything productive? No, I'm like
There
I mean,
are
I
some
think
lazy people
that's
out there.
true, and I think that there are people who do that for years, but then I think there's people who realize after a few years, they're like, I would rather have a productive relationship and a family, I'd rather be a good member of society, but at this point I'm stuck doing what I'm doing. It's too late to go back for a college degree, or I have too much debt, or I have too many I have a kid and I can't go back to whatever. So I feel like there is I feel like it's more than 50% of people who work at McDonald's would rather be doing something else, but they're stuck.
So
I don't know.
what's your question again? Like, I forgot.
Yeah, it's like, what if that's all they wanted to do with life? Like, maybe they are fulfilled by just being, like, the
So,
burger
like,
flipper
Doing
manager.
the bare, okay.
Yeah, doing
So let's go to let's imagine that we were having this conversation 100 years ago, and instead of talking about AI, we're talking about machines and farming equipment. I feel like your question, I'm not disparaging your question, I think it's a valid question, but I feel like your question is, well, what are all the farmers going to do? Like, it's like, well, they do something else. Like, I don't know, like, what did the farmers all end up doing? Like, they did something new, like, they adapted. And I feel like that's what we're saying about McDonald's workers, or how we're talking about truck drivers, is like, well, you'll adapt. We don't need everyone to farm, because back in the day, every single person had a farm. Like, just about every single person. I mean, there may be a few artisans in society, and then there was the king, but like 90% of people farmed. Now, like 5% of the population farms, and everybody else does something else, because machines have taken away, vast numbers of people who need to farm. So it's true that we're just hitting another wave of, this is another industrial revolution where now 90% of people aren't going to have white-collar or blue-collar jobs, and instead they're going to do something else. What that new thing is, I don't know. Just like people back in the day didn't know what the farmers were going to do.
I think this brings in a good segue into another aspect of AI.
Let's go, baby.
And so we talk about how humans have adapted throughout the course of our history. We've improved technology and our quality of life. And so listening to Elon Musk, he brought up some interesting points about the implications that AI could have on human life. And so far we looked at it from two individual entities and two different perspectives of how does the human race create an AI, and how do we react to what that AI does. And then it's kind of a dynamic relationship where there's constant adaptation of the other side. And so what Elon Musk proposed as an idea is the best way to cope with these changes that AI will provide to the world is to actually enhance ourselves through AI. And so it would serve as a greater benefit to the human race, because now we're enhancing our own capabilities instead of just creating something that, minimizes our abilities.
Yeah.